Good evening. You could be seated. We're going to be continuing in another Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification class. Thank you for your patience. Just dealing with some technical difficulties. We've got some very high winds down here in the Texas area, so we have to make adjustments as things come up. But in case you're joining us, we're continuing in the self-control unit. Now, this is Unit 3 of the intermediate series, and we've been moving forward for the last, year or so, going through character and acceptance. And of course, we're in chapter 2 of this self-control unit, and this is a very emotional chapter, because it's dealing specifically with emotions and controlling your emotions, learning how to control your emotions to your advantage, and using these things, the techniques that we've learned. Remember, even though this is a new chapter, this is a different book, we're incorporating everything that we've garnered, that we've harvested, so to speak, from the character and acceptance unit and bringing it right into this unit here in this chapter of chapter 2 and dealing with emotions. Now, this of course, this book is one of the most popular books of the intermediate series, but this chapter here is so vital in a person using these character traits, using the characteristics, the traits that they've been learning for so long in a positive way, because emotions, everybody has them. We can't, even that stoic person who acts like a statue and nobody can kind of ruffle his feathers, so to speak, that person has emotions too, right? But what we're trying to learn with this chapter that we're going through right now is getting the student to be able to recognize the difference between positive and negative emotions, because everything, like we keep mentioning over and over, things fall into one of those two categories, either positive or negative, right? Influences, emotions, experiences, feelings, and so forth, character traits. Recognize the difference between those two things, and then learn how to respond to those emotions, right? Because there's going to be a response to the emotion, whether the person realizes it or not. Sometimes responses can be instant. Sometimes they can take a little bit of time to build up, especially if a person, goes over something. They kind of mull over it over and over and over in their mind, and it builds and it feeds certain negative emotions, and then eventually they act on it. Well, even the choice to mull over that emotion over and over and over in your mind is kind of reflective of the person's character, where their goals are, and a decision to hold on to negative thoughts, which lead to negative feelings. And of course, we can't leave that out because we're talking here about emotions, emotions, feelings, and so forth, but we can't forget all the other precursor that we've received in these lessons in regards to how important it is to control our thoughts, right? Because in order for us to even get to this point, we've had to deal with thoughts first. Even if those thoughts were so fast the person didn't even realize they thought that, right? Like it was covered in the previous lessons on triggers, right? The trigger, something that starts a process, or if it was something that like I said before, you kind of took a little bit of time and considered a particular thought, and it brought up an emotion. Okay, irregardless of that, the emotion came as a result of the thought. So now, in this chapter, we're trying to get the student to understand that emotions are absolutely normal. There's nothing wrong with it. Like it was covered in the previous several classes. Even anger. Anger just lets you know there's just something that you disagree with, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you are a bad person. It doesn't mean that you have to act out angrily in your interactions with someone or sometimes something, right? Because sometimes people will go and they'll throw a tool or kick a door or something out of anger, and we're going to get into that too, because that's getting into anger styles, but that's in the next chapter. I don't want to give you too many spoilers on that. But those are things that you can recognize both within yourself and in dealing with others. But we're going to be picking up today on, like I said, chapter 2, and we're going to be starting on page 38. But before we start there, let's turn back to lesson plan 2, page or D. lesson plan 2, or lesson plan 2, page D. Yep, I said it right. And we're going to look at procedure 4. All right. And I know this was read previously, and I just kind of want to refresh our memories, refresh our minds, refresh or freshen or introduce anybody who might be watching us for the first time what we're covering here in regards to these procedures. Excuse me. There's also some allergies too taking place. Number 4 here, because we've gone through the first 3 procedures here, but number 4 here reminds us to inform students that in addition to affecting our interactions. Now, I want you to pay attention to that word interactions, all right? Because we're talking about emotions. In addition to affecting our interactions. Now, simply put, interactions are communications or direct involvement with someone or something, all right? Or communications or direct involvement, doesn't necessarily always have to be words, with someone or something, okay? When you're working on a tractor, you're interacting with that tractor. When you're teaching a class as a teacher, you're interacting with your students. If you're giving a speech, you're interacting with the crowd and so forth. But in addition to affecting our interactions, emotions can also affect us physically and mentally. And then it tells the teacher to have students turn to pages 34 through 40, and we're kind of in the middle, almost to the end of that, to the sections entitled Not Just Skin Deep, Emotions Can Really Wear You Down, Tips for Overcoming Stress. And these particular pages or points were covered by the previous teachers. And what we're going to be talking about today, emotions can really build you up, and emotions can really be confusing, especially when you're young and you don't even understand everything that's taking place within your body, within your environment, these different feelings, that are going on, and it can be very confusing at this particular time period in a young man or woman's life. And this is why guidance is so imperative, because if they're left without guidance and they're left to just act on emotions, they can get themselves into a lot of trouble getting involved with risk-taking behavior, like we covered in the first chapter of the character unit, getting themselves involved with risk-taking behavior that can leave them permanently scarred, bring about consequences in their life that are irreversible. Okay, so it's beneficial or advantageous for us as teachers, to really work on catching and preventing these activities in a child's life, a young man or a young woman's life, long before they take place. But it's not a hopeless cause if a person has gotten themselves into a situation where they've made some bad choices, right? Because the Peaceful Solution is a program of prevention and a program of intervention, intervening in a person's behalf where they have made bad choices. Well, hey, look, this is what you can do to fix these choices, okay? So it's not hopeless either way, and you might be teaching students who've not experienced these things, or you might be teaching students who are deeply experienced in these negative choices in life. So it says here, have students complete each of the accompanying exercises, and then allow as many students as time permits to share their answers with the class. And then stress that an important aspect of living a healthy life, physically, mentally, and emotionally, is to learn how to manage and control emotions. And remember kind of where we had that foundation to some degree laid down for a healthy life, or healthy interactions. We got that in the character unit. In fact, I'm going to turn back there real quick, because we talked in that chapter about a healthy family. And then when you think about what we're talking about in controlling one's emotions, by the time a student has gotten to this point in life where they're 11 through 13 years old, they've already had the groundwork to some degree, the foundation laid down in their life based on their experiences, right? Their influences, sometimes maybe even the family values, and seeing how others have responded in their own environment, and they in turn typically imitate the same thing, okay? And so That's why the family is so important. And we can't go back and change the family per se. When we're dealing with the student, we can't go back and change history, is what I mean. But we can help them to be able to realize or to recognize certain things that did take place in their family, and what they can do now as a young man or a young woman in making choices to improve themselves. Um, uh-oh. Let me find my point here that I was going to read. Let's see here. I was going to read here. Oh, I think I'm a little bit too far. Yes, I'm sorry. I was not far enough in my book. On page 44 here, because this talks about a healthy family, okay? Because we're talking about leading a healthy life, and the groundwork being laid for leading a healthy life to some degree does start at home, right? Or leading an unhealthy life. Now, not to say that a person can't grow up in a healthy family, a healthy environment, and then get themselves involved with some negative influences, running with the wrong crowd, and then their life can spiral downhill. But for the most part, if a person starts off on a great foot, typically they're going to have a better opportunity to recognize positive choices and to make positive choices that will enable them to be successful in life. Well, on page 44 of the character unit, chapter 2, it says kind of down in the first paragraph down towards the middle there, and it's talking about the difference between a healthy and a dysfunctional family. And it says, the difference between a healthy family that has been trained or have trained themselves in moral character and a dysfunctional one is that in a healthy family, all members are given the love, respect, and support that is needed to develop moral character traits. Now, you think about that from the standpoint of a child, when you see that demonstrated on a regular basis, because remember, we're talking about interactions, right? Our interactions and how our emotions play a part in our interactions with others. When a child sees that healthy interaction between maybe their mother and their father, or their mother and the child, or the child and the other child, their siblings and so forth, it sets a precedent in their mind, a standard in their mind as to how they should conduct themselves in society. And sadly, when children do conduct themselves in a very moral or positive way in society, and they're kind of shunned for it, like, what are you, a goody two-shoe or something like that, it kind of it brings about a lot of confusion in their mind, because if they grow up in an if they grew up in an environment where they see these things taking place and how beneficial and how peaceful it is, and then when they're kind of introduced to a not so nice world or society, it kind of makes them confused. Like, why are people talking down? Why are people being disrespectful to me? I'm treating them with kindness. Why are they not treating me with kindness? And that's why education is so important, because when they're educated and understanding that not everybody's learning how to develop a positive character right now, it sets realistic goals. So they're going to know and expect, yeah, I'm going to encounter some disrespect, but that's not going to cause me to lower my standards in how I respond to them, right? Because as we're going to learn, responding to disrespect with more disrespect is like adding fuel to the fire. It just makes the situation even worse. So it continues on here. It says, in families educated in positive moral character, appropriate affection is shown to all members. Now, this affection, it ties, into emotions and positive emotions, that support the healthy building of a positive character within the family. In other words, it is appropriate for members of a family to display true love and concern, congratulations, appreciations, and sometimes a loving hug. Now, this is not to be confused, like we talked about, with the inappropriate touch of sexual molestation. An appropriate touch does not cause you to feel uncomfortable, and that was covered in the previous class, the difference between, that lust or that desire, that leads to many things that cause problems in life. Children from families, notice here, educated in positive morals, know that family members can be trusted not to abuse them in any way. Now, in these families, children communicate, and that's very important, because that communication also ties into what we're looking at in our lesson plan here in dealing with interactions. Communicate their needs to parents in positive ways. Children also respond to their parents with respect. Members of the family verbally express their care and concern for each other by saying things like "I love you" or "appreciate you," and other verbal courtesies such as "please," "thank you," and "I apologize" are frequently used in everyday interactions. In these families, the use of kind words is valued, and these parents teach by example that name calling, teasing, and insults robs others of their self-worth. So you see how this foundation can be laid in the child's life for their interactions later on in life, right? These are strong family values, strong positive family values that created an important point in the child's mind in how they should conduct themselves when interacting with others so that they can have, now this contributes now, and the reason I read all that, because this contributes to them having a healthy life, right? Healthy life, positive, or physically, mentally, and emotionally. All right, so let's go back to page 38. And this builds up to what we're going to be picking up here within this procedure, number 4. And we're going to be looking at how emotions can really build you up. Emotions can really build you up. Now, the very first sentence in that paragraph there, it says, now that you have evaluated the negative effects of emotions and the stress that they can cause. Now that you have evaluated the effects of negative emotions and the stress that they can cause. And there's a comma there. But when you look at that, so as a teacher, depending on how the lessons go, you might have ended up stopping at the previous page, right? So now, let's say you have a class once a week or twice a week, you might have to do a little backtracking to refresh in the minds of your students, well, what in the world are the effects that negative emotions can cause? And this is what we're going to do right now, because it says before we get into that, we're going to evaluate some of the effects of positive emotions. But let's look back to page 35, page 35, because this is where we started talking about, well, not really started talking about it. We covered it a little bit earlier, but when we're looking at negative emotions and how they can bring you down, because we're talking about the effects that negative emotions, the effects that negative emotions and the stress that they can bring on you. Well, page, not 35, 34 is what I meant to say. Look underneath that heading at the bottom of the page. Emotions can really wear you down. Emotions can really wear you down. And then we look at the first paragraph there. It says emotions such as anger, anxiety, fear, guilt, and jealousy. Now, the common thread there is the classification of negative emotions there. Can cause stress or tension to build in our minds and bodies, right? Have you ever been faced with a difficult situation? Has someone come at you, in a very angry type way, right? And a lot of times we kind of go into a defense mode, right? And we might not even realize it at times. Maybe somebody's coming at us and yelling at us or something like that, or I can't believe you didn't make your room up like I told you to do, or what, whatever the case might be. And without even realizing it, that being a trigger, right? Something that starts a process, you start to kind of tense up, right? You might bring your fist down, your hands down into a fist, and not that you're pointing them at anybody, but it's just kind of a response. They call it fight or flight, your chest, your shoulders might kind of be drawn up a little bit. Your breath might get a little bit shorter. Your pulse might your pulse might quicken, as your heartbeat accelerates and everything, because that trigger sent the signal to your brain, to your body, to prepare to do something, to prepare to flee or to prepare to respond to this input that you're receiving, right? And it does not necessarily have to be something where you're going to fight, but like I said, we kind of get in that defensive mode at times, right? And so this causes this tension or this stress to build in our minds and our bodies. Remember, thoughts, feelings, actions. That quick. Think of it like this. Your body is a complex structure composed of organs and systems that perform various functions. Everything must be balanced and work together precisely for you to function at your very best. All right, and you think about it. I like the example that's been given, kind of like the example of a finely tuned clock, right? And I think the people that are kind of known for their great clocks are the Swiss. They're also known for their army knives too. But their clocks and all the intricate gears and sprockets and springs and everything that goes into making a clock tick perfectly every single second, right? And if one of those things, one of those gears or one of those little sprockets or one little screw even falls out, right, and loosens up or jams into it between a gear, it can throw that whole clock out of whack. Okay, well, it's the same thing with our body. There are things, there are negative things that we can put in our body, right, through lifestyles or choices or just, environment and so forth that can, and we'll get into that a little bit later, that can throw off that perfect balance. And then instead of us being able to calmly respond to a situation that, does not require a high degree of input, or stress, sometimes people fly off the handle because they have imbalances, right? And so it says, your mind must be healthy in order for your body to function well, and your body must be healthy in order for your mind to function well. And I think the term that's used is these things must function synergetically together. Okay, they're codependent, right? You can't have a head just sitting over here, and it's saying, I don't need nobody, or a body over here without a head, and expect both of those things to, be able to function properly independently of one another. Your mind needs the body to be healthy. At the same time, your body needs the mind to be healthy because what? We make our decisions in our minds, through our minds, right? The information is stored up there in our minds, and then we have to draw off of that information in order to make a decision. And a lot of times students don't even realize that. They don't even realize that there are all these complexities that go into their decision-making process and the things that can influence their decision-making process, whether it be positive or negative, right? And so this is why it's so important that we educate them and continuously, positively and softly remind them of these things so until it becomes a part of them, because it's not just a normal thing, okay? It says, let us compare how our bodies function with the process of following a recipe to bake a cake. That says the right balance of ingredients is needed for the cake to come out just right. Too much of one ingredient, not enough of another, will yield poor results. In the same manner, certain stress within the body over a long period of time is like not following the recipe for the cake and putting in 2 cups of salt and only 1 teaspoon of sugar. That's a cake there that'll have you run into the bathroom really quick. Unmanaged stress. Now here we go. Unmanaged stress, just like uncontrolled anger, right? These things in themselves, by themselves, are not necessarily bad. Okay, they're not all categorized, and we're going to see that around in regards to stress. I kind of like the example that I gave some classes ago in regards to trees. Stress. Let me just read this definition for you real quick. Stress is, it can be defined in various ways, but stress here is a feeling of emotional or physical tension. It can come from any event or thought that makes you feel frustrated, angry, or nervous. Stress is your body's reaction to a challenge or demand. Okay, it's your body's reaction to a challenge or demand, kind of like the example I gave when someone comes at you aggressively. I guess that's the word I was looking for. Comes at you aggressively, and that's your response. You tense up, you tighten up, you might start sweating, you might get a little bit nervous, your pulse quickens, and so forth. Now it says here, in short bursts, stress can be positive, such as when it helps you to avoid danger or meet a deadline. Kind of like when you walking down the road and you hear that horn from the truck, wonk, wonk, and you look back and you see headlights and you dart into the other direction. positive form of stress, I'd say, kept you from turning into a pancake on the road. So there are some positive forms of stress. In fact, I was looking this up here, kind of the history of it, and William talked a little bit about the etymology of words, and a lot of these terms that have come up they're not, they're not always terms that have been around for thousands of years. Some of them are fairly new, and you'll find in the English language that, look at the dictionary ever so often, that there are new words incorporated in our language, and it is not only with English but many other languages as well. But there's actually an institute. It's the American Institute of Stress, right? And that's what they solely focus on. From what I understand, it's a very stressful place to work. But it's the American Institute of Stress, and they just deal with the effects of stress, positive or negative, psychological, emotional, and so forth. But it was interesting because I was reading on their website here, and it says the term stress, as it is currently used, was coined by Hans Selye, it's Selye, in 1936, who defined it as the non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. The non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. It was interesting because a little bit further down in the article, they were just showing how, in order to use this word, it didn't really fit in other languages. Whoops, sorry about that. It didn't fit in other languages, right? The word stress, because it described the different things, kind of like when you take one word from English and you try to transliterate it into another language or translate it into another language, it doesn't always fit, what that meaning is in their country. But it was around 1946, and trying to explain what this word meant in French and German and Russian and so forth, it became apparent that most people viewed stress as some unpleasant threat, because it also meant the word strain. It correlated, or a synonym of the word stress also was strain, like a strain, on the ecosystem, or a strain on your bank account or whatever, or straining when you're lifting up something heavy. And it says Selye, I hope I'm not pronouncing his name wrong there, subsequently had to create a new word, stressor, which is to distinguish stimulus from response. Stress was generally considered as being synonymous with distress, and dictionaries defined it as physical, mental, or emotional strain or tension, or a condition of feeling experienced, or a condition or feeling experienced when a person perceives that demands exceed the personal and social resources the individual is able to mobilize. So in other words, I don't have enough to do this, now I'm getting stressed out, for an example. Thus, stress was put in a negative light, and its positive effects ignored. However, stress can be helpful and great when it motivates people to accomplish more. Okay, and we're going to talk about a little bit some of the positive sides of stress as well, as we get into this, because in regards to emotions, sometimes your body does not it does not always recognize different things, like different emotions that's more so mental than physical, right? But they can have an impact on your body depending on how you think about it, right? What was I was watching a speaker one time, and they were saying that physically, I think they were saying physically, excitement and anxiety, or maybe they used the word stress, affects your body the same way, right? Excitement or anxiety or a type of stress affects your body the same way, right? Your heart beats, sometimes you might get excited, your pupils might dilate. It's a physical response to a stimulus. The difference between you being excited or you having anxiety is right here, right? How you look at it, how we look at it, how we perceive it, right? And as a result, that's how we're going to respond to it, okay? And so it was interesting because, they were just kind of breaking that down and showing that, it can be negative, but it also sometimes is positive. And what I was going to say before was, when you think about a tree and how a tree gain strength, two things have an effect on the tree: the gravity and wind. Wind can actually strengthen the tree. When it's in a windy environment. Have you ever seen? I think I've shown the pictures before, but I don't know if anybody's ever lived in an environment where palm trees are. We don't have many up here in West Texas, but I know a little further south Texas, there's more palm trees there. And those things can lay down like this in a hurricane. I mean, they'll be laid down like this, trunk laid down like that. And, after the hurricane's over, they'll eventually stand back up, right? But in reading and understanding about palm trees, that those things, that those strong winds, those high winds are actually very beneficial to the palm tree. Wouldn't think so, but it is. Kind of like the fires in California, how the very huge and old redwood trees, they don't even release their seeds until so much degrees or so much time of a fire is taking place. They release those seeds after a fire takes place. Okay. And so sometimes the things that a person might perceive as negative in one situation might actually be very beneficial in another situation. Another stress that we have is something called gravity. Okay. Kind of keeps us grounded. Even though it would be nice to float in the sky and flop all over the place, or you maybe in space more so, right? Because even if you float in the sky, gravity still has an effect on you. But that gravity, it actually strengthens our bones. It strengthens our long bones, especially in our legs. They become denser and stronger. It's a part of it. You've got to eat healthy too. As opposed to when people go out in space for a long period of time and they don't have that gravity, that effect of gravity, their bones become more brittle. They suffer more osteoporosis, right? And gravity is actually a form of stress, right? This is why people feel so much like they've got to drag themselves out of bed in the morning. It's not fighting being tired. You're just fighting gravity, right? So anyway, it says here in the next paragraph, in the same manner, certain stress within the body over a long period of time is like not following the recipe of cake. Oh, I read that part. Unmanaged stress has the ability to negatively affect the way the various systems and organs function, causing the body to become unbalanced. And remember, we just read there that that's very important for us to have healthy bodies and healthy minds. And then it goes into some of the other effects of what negative stress can bring. All right, let's go back over to page 38. So, because here it says at the rest of that sentence, let's analyze the effects of positive emotions. For example, the feeling of being appreciated can lower stress and have a beneficial effect on both your mind and body. Okay, the feeling of being appreciated, can lower the effects of stress that stress can have on your mind and body. An example: the awareness that someone else acknowledges your efforts and that person is thankful for your help can result in other positive emotions such as acceptance and joy. And even if a person has the mindset of, I don't need nobody to tell me thank you, I'm just doing this because I want to do it. Really, a person is appreciative when someone appreciates the work and the effort that they put in, right? Even if they don't need someone to say thank you, they appreciate when someone does say thank you, Personally, I don't like attention being placed on me when I guess do what I feel that's what I'm supposed to do. I don't need someone to say, that's a great job there, Catan, but I don't get upset when someone says that's a great job there, Catan. Like, would you stop telling me I'm doing a great job, for heaven's sakes? I've never seen anybody get upset about that. So those things make you feel appreciated. It makes you feel, joyful. It makes you feel accepted. And that motivates you to continue to do what you do well, right? Or to improve yourself. I know one of the things that I like to challenge myself and I tell a lot of the, students, young men and women that I interact with, challenge yourself, Don't worry about trying to, stress out about you're not as great as this person or you're not as great as that person. Try to be better than you were yesterday. Just focus on improving yourself. Focus on doing the very best that you can do, right? then you don't have to have the burden of the stress of this person's better than me in that, and that person's better than me in this. And, you could just focus only on, the things that you need to improve on. And then you'll see that the burden is a lot lighter. Okay. And it can be very overwhelming because, as we talked about in the acceptance unit, young people, they compare themselves to their peers, right? They compare themselves to their peers because they want to fit in with their environment. And if they feel that they don't meet that standard that is set by society, or their peer group, which we're talking about people who are 11 to 13 years of age, what kind of standards are they setting? Especially when they're getting their influences from social media and so forth. It can have a negative effect on an individual. So this is why it's important for us as teachers, that those role models, those positive influences and so forth, to set the standard, set the bar high in the minds for our students, that they're better than something they see on a social media page. That doesn't define them. What defines them is the type of character that they develop and how they use that in their interactions with others on a daily basis. So it says here, positive emotions, notice here, balance the body and mind. They can relieve anxiety, stabilize heart rate and blood pressure, as well as stimulate the immune system, keeping it healthy and making you better able to fight off infectious diseases, or even criticism from others. And it's interesting, criticism from others, this criticism from others, sometimes, it's not necessarily the criticism in a way that is to improve you, to help you to see where you made maybe a bad choice, or a mistake in a particular place, and now they're directing you in the right steps to take, right? Sometimes criticism just comes from other people because of jealousy, right? Because you're doing something better than they are, or they just don't like you, right? And so their only goal is to tear you down. Anything bad that they see about you, they're going to make sure they're the ones to point it out, okay? And so we have to be prepared, or students have to be prepared, all of us have to be prepared to fight off this, I guess you can call it a form of infectious disease, because it can be infectious if we allow it to affect us, right? And then we start to act based off of that those negative emotions, and spread that to other people. Now, we've become a part of it. It's a term I was thinking of called VTDs. It's a VTD, a verbally transmitted disease. Things that can be said, or like William was talking about, VDs in the previous class there, VDs, not venereal disease, but verbal diseases, right? Verbal diseases are the things that people say to you that can negatively impact you, and you respond in a negative way based on that, and then you start spreading that to other people. Because negativity can spread pretty easily, right? In the right environment, or I guess just to say in the wrong environment. In the right environment, it would stop. But given the circumstances, it can spread very quickly, right? We've seen examples of that in society where people will start rioting based off of a particular thing that was said or done, right? And it spreads like wildfire. But we want to be careful about that, and we have to teach our students to guard their minds, and to, they don't always have to impulsively act because something was presented to them that triggered a thought that led to an emotion, right? They can take the time to stop, step back, stop, think about what's taking place right now. Why are they feeling the way that they're feeling? Why are they thinking the way that they're thinking? And what's the best way to respond? And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. Even as adults, it can be very easy to act impulsively on something, especially if it's something that's very close to you, or very dear, or very important to you. So it says here, let's see here. So these positive emotions, of course, they help us to deal with these things. In fact, let's see, I pull off an article here showing how positive emotions strengthen the immune system. It says, these scientists here, it says they quote it here. It says, "We are slowly beginning to unravel the complex interactions between mental and physical health. Researchers have found a wealth of evidence that positive emotions can enhance the immune system while negative emotions can suppress it." And that was from psychcentral.com and from simsmancenter.ucla.edu. They said here, the studies found that positive moods actually boosted the proliferative response and kept it elevated for a short time, and then it returned to its normal state. Social relationships appear to play an important role in the functioning of the immune system and in general well-being. Now, those social relationships, they can affect you in both positive and negative ways. So, being social and having friends and so forth that you interact with on a daily basis, that's very beneficial to your health, to your well-being, okay? When people are put in isolation for long periods of time, they suffer greatly mentally, because we need that stimulus from other people. There are things we get when we interact with other people, okay? And so, these positive emotions can have a very positive effect on our immune system, because when we think about it, our immune system, it's responsible, like was mentioned in previous classes, it's the guard, right? It's the guard that guards all the gates to our bodies, okay? And our immune system is not just one thing. It's a system of things, right? From things that are in your nose, your mouth, your eyes, your ears, your skin, underneath the skin, the organs and everything, in your bone marrow. It's a complex system that is meant to protect your body from foreign invaders, okay? But when things suppress the ability of the immune system to do its job, then it leaves room for other invaders who are not necessarily normally super strong to begin with. It leaves them free rein to be able to wear down the organs, okay? And it's people look at stress, and it's not just that stress alone like is going to cause you to have heart disease, not just stress alone, but stress can weaken your body's immune system, coupled with possibly an unhealthy eating style, lifestyle. A lot of different factors go into this complex body that we carry with us on a daily basis. Maybe genetic things that we've inherited from our parents or our grandparents or great-grandparents. We might be carrying with us. The suppression of the immune system can actually give those things the freedom to be able to have their way within our bodies. So positive emotions are a very, very beneficial thing, Not that negative emotions will never come, right? But we have to learn how to manage them. Not suppress them, but manage them, okay? Because if you suppress something, eventually it's just going to build until it explodes, boils over until it explodes. So we have to manage them in a proper way. So let's look at page 39 here, because this is where you'll take the opportunity with your students in one of the activities here in thinking of a situation where you experience a positive emotion. For instance, your mother cooked your most liked meal for supper. For me, that would be lasagna. And when you asked her what the special occasion was, she says, it's just because I love you. Did you smile? Did your eyes lighten up? Did you say, okay, what's the catch? That's the people who are pessimistic. They, somebody does something nice for them, and okay, what's the catch? There's got to be a catch here. Is this hidden cameras out here somewhere? But it's just because the mother decided to do something kind for you, right? And sometimes people could do that. And we talked about in a healthy family, those types of things are expressed. Write a brief description of a positive event in your life. What emotions did it evoke? Identify the emotions as well as the physical and mental changes you experienced. And that word there, evoked, I think I wrote it down in here. Let me just double check. But it means to bring to the mind, is part of what that word evoked means. Well, I know I wrote it down somewhere, and that's okay. But that's pretty much what the word means. It means to bring to your mind, bring to the front of your mind. All right, so that's an activity that you would do with your students there. And what's interesting about that is that when a person is writing that down, if you were to just take the opportunity to write that down and really think about a time when you experienced a positive emotion, thinking about that time will cause you to experience that positive emotion again. Those thoughts, those memories don't go away. I think many of us can think back 20, 30, 40 years to a time in our lives when we had a really great experience, right? And we can relive those emotions again. We can remember the weather, we can remember the smells, we can remember the things we saw, right? All those things are kind of locked into that memory because one of the powerful things about emotions is that they kind of help to give memories deep root in our heart and mind, and we can easily go back to them. At the same time, in a negative way, people can have those memories deeply rooted, but it's almost like the mind shuts out the memory. But the trigger and the experience and the emotion is there, but the memory that caused it is sometimes blocked out. Okay, and this is where people a lot of times they go to try to get treatment and hypnosis to bring these things to the surface and so forth. But it can be, emotions can be very powerful, and they can affect us for a very long time depending on the circumstances that we encounter with them, either positive or negative. Our goal is to recognize the negative emotions, but not focus on them, right? But to accentuate the positive. They're there. We need to recognize them, but we're trying to teach the students to accentuate the positive aspect of these things, right? Manage them, both positive and negative, in a way that doesn't bring harm to ourselves, others, or the environment. Like we're going to find out if we get to that point, or probably possibly in the next class, how even positive emotions can cause difficulties. Let's look at page 40 here. We're on page 40, continuing on here, and we're going to see here how emotions can really be confusing. And we read here, although there will be some situations where you clearly know what you're feeling, there will be other experiences that, here's the definition here, other experiences that will evoke mixed feelings. And this word evoke here means bring or recall to the mind. Okay, bring or recall to the mind. And so these feelings will be brought to the mind. Mixed feelings will be brought to your mind, and you might be kind of a little bit confused as to what you're feeling at that time. And see, we have the following example here. Have you ever heard the term bittersweet? Now, when I think of bittersweet, first thing comes into my mind are bittersweet chocolate chips and a chocolate chip cookie. And I remember they have that pungent bitterness, but also like that little sweetness at the back of my tongue, when I ate that chocolate. I don't mean to make you guys hungry, but I think about those cookies rising in the oven, and that's some of my childhood memories that I had, waiting by the oven, waiting for those cookies to hurry up and get done. They couldn't get done fast enough. Well, it says here, this term is commonly used to describe an experience, notice, that is both joyful and sad at the same time. And I know that we can all think of times when we've experienced something that was joyful or sad. I can think of many times. For example, you and your best friend received permission to go on a field trip. For weeks, you talked about all the fun you will have. The morning of the field trip, your friend catches a bad cold and is unable to go. Now, today he probably would have caught COVID, but, he's unable to go. Although you're glad you're still able to go, you're also sad that your friend is sick. Okay, so that's the sweetness, the bitterness that your friend's not able to go, but the sweetness of, well, at least I'll get to go, And so that's the example of that bittersweet, that mixed emotion there. Not only can your emotions be mixed, they can also quickly change, okay? Sometimes the same situation can evoke different feelings at different times. This can cause indecisiveness or the inability to make up one's mind and stick to a decision. So we see that definition that really followed right there, that word, indecisiveness, an inability to make up one's mind and stick to that decision, right? Indecisive is like being on a boat, and it's the waves are throwing you one side of the boat, the other side of the boat, the other side of the boat, right? Instead of just holding on and staying in one spot, you don't know which place you're going to be because you're just being tossed about by everything that's taking place. And that's what, all these influences and circumstances coming your way, like it says, it could be the same circumstances that can evoke different emotions, and it can cause you to be indecisive. Well, you want to do it. Well, I really like to. I really like to go on the field trip. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I really like to do something else, though. I mean, I could probably do that later. Well, did you guys already buy the tickets? I kind of think I'd like to go. You know, I don't know if you've ever dealt with an indecisive person. But it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes. I have to deal with that in my business because some of the hardest things for people to pick is colors, right? People try to pick colors to match things, and they have a picture in their mind, and they see a picture here, and then when it's in place, it's not really what they want, right? And now they want to change it, and then they want it shiny, then they want it dull. They're not very decisive, and it can be very frustrating when you're on the receiving end of that. But it says here, some circumstances can alter the way you think about people, things, or places. This will, in turn, cause your feelings to change. For example, the park across the street from where Philip lives used to be a place where he and his family would go for picnics. Philip has many pleasant memories of the times he spent there. These memories evoke, and remember we called there that recalls to mind, brings to mind, these memories evoke feelings of joy, appreciation, and acceptance. However, recently several people were robbed and one was seriously hurt while at the park. Now Philip and his family are afraid to go there. So you have one spot, one area, the park in this case, where many positive emotions were experienced, right? Many great memories were made, and it made him feel, all warm and fuzzy inside. Well, after this news, it turned into, negative feeling. They don't want to go there. Why? Oh, no one wants to get robbed. No one wants to get seriously hurt, right? And so that same area or that same environment created two different emotions because of the circumstances that took place there. And then lastly here it says, have you ever felt a certain way about a person, place, or thing? And this can occur with people. This can occur with people, especially when people go from, demonstrating a positive character. And you see this as young men and women get older and they start splitting off into different groups. And sometimes the groups that, your friend that you might have been friends since elementary school with, starts hanging out with, might be one of those negative influences. And you start seeing your friend's attitude, their behavior, their choices, their character start going downhill. And you really start to not enjoy spending time with them, right? Not that you hate them, but you don't like what they've become, okay? And it can work on the opposite side too. You could have somebody who maybe was a bully in high school, and you see that they've changed their ways and they've become a very respectful, kind person. They realize what they did wrong, and they've changed, and they're trying to do the best that they can to fix their character, okay? And so this can occur with people as well. Use the lines below, and this is an activity that you would give your students, and this would be a perfect place to end your class here if you had the opportunity to end your class here on the day. To have your students use the lines below to tell how you first felt about it. What caused your feelings to change, and how do you feel about it now? And it'll give them the opportunity to really examine how, confusing emotions can be, or allow them to see how those emotions change pretty quickly because the circumstances change, or the person changed, or the environment changed, or events changed that cause their thoughts and their feelings to change in regards to how they saw or dealt with or looked at that person, place, or thing. So we're going to take the opportunity right there to stop on page 40 for this class, and we'll pick up on page 41 for next class, which will be 323, Wednesday, 323 at 5:30 p.m. Central Time. Again, we do thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next class. Have a great evening.